to episode 406 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Michael O'Malley
and Jessica Carr.
In today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be kicking off this year's Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1927's The Cat and the Canary. Which, if that title throws you, just watch the movie and they'll say it 15 times. Let's go ahead real quickly, head over to, we have the full list. I tweeted it out from the Cinematary Twitter account, but if you're looking for the entire listing of the Young Critics series that is currently on cinematary.com, we're going to hopefully update it relatively soon with some possible guests and things like that, but I think a pretty strong lineup. I'm not going to even say any of them. You have to go to the website. No, I'm just kidding. Next week, we're going to continue the 1920 series with Faust. Trying to look. The ones I'm excited for this stretch. We have Tale of the Fox, which is one of the earliest stop-motion animated movies. We have Treasure of the Sierra Madre, which is just a all-out fun movie. I'm excited to talk about Bicycle Thieves because I hope Andrew will be on it, even though he doesn't seem to like Italian movies or Italian neorealist movies, and talked about how once very early in this podcast about how he doesn't like that movie.
He should revisit it.
I just remember distinctly he had a whole rant about it. So that's why that's there. It was a tie, and I picked that one because I was like, oh, Andrew hates this.
What a great way to vote.
That's how I vote. Andrew hates this.
I can't believe that
was my
nomination. Have to watch
nomination.
Pink Flamingos, which I'm not revisiting.
Zach is the only one on
What
here
is
who
this
has
we
to.
that you're talking about?
Well, not me.
I would rewatch
I'm not,
Pink
yeah,
Flamingos.
Zach
I think
has
it
to,
is
but
like
nobody else does.
60 to 70% a great time, but then the other 40 to 30% is not a good time at all. So, but those 60%.
Yeah, I went to a party where that movie was just playing, and then everyone around me started like trying to have sex with each other, and I was like, I gotta get out of here. I was like, oh no. It was weird.
I can't imagine having sex to that movie.
It was bad vibes. It was bad energy. I was like, I need to leave.
Cinematary takes that stand today. We don't know how anybody could have sex to Pink Flamingos. Don't challenge us. All right, well, let's move off of whatever the hell we got on. And Jessica, you're going to kick us off with a movie you watched this week.
That's right. So I just decided that I wanted to explore a director's filmography that I really loved. One of his feature films, so it's Juzo Atami, and he is the director of Tampopo, which is like one of my favorite movies of all time ever. It is probably like my number one favorite movie. And I had seen someone on Letterboxd, they watched his movie The Funeral, and it happens to be his first feature, and then Tampopo was his second feature. And I was reading the description, and the poster of it looks really cool, and it is a 1984 film, and it is his first feature, but it, like, the poster has all of the family members drawn as, like, little characters, like, they're, like, hand-drawn, and it's, like, a very grumpy old person, and the film is, takes place whenever basically the patriarch of a family dies, so he is the grandpa of the family, and then he dies, and all of the family has to gather because in Japan, like, whenever a family member dies, it's this whole thing, and you have to host the body in the house, and everyone hangs out for like 3 days. You have to pay a monk to come in and do this like huge ceremony. Everyone has to be fed the entire time. So it's a lot of work and a lot of preparation and a lot of ritual that goes into like a traditional Japanese funeral. And this film, it just takes you through that entire process. So the opening is, and it's actually like there are very funny parts in the movie, even though it seems like it would be very grim, where the opening is like the grandpa character and his wife, and he gets back from the doctor and he says like, the doctor told me I am super healthy, like everything is great, I could probably live for like another 20 years, and I brought eel home and let's roast it and let's have this like extravagant dinner to celebrate. And he just like eats everything that he's ever wanted to eat and then hangs out and stuff, and then literally like wakes up to watch the sunrise, and then he has a heart attack and dies. And it's like, damn.
That's like that Simpsons episode where the dude's like, I just retired and I bought my boat to live forever. Then he like gets killed.
And it was like,
anyway,
it was like, damn. But so the whole movie, like, you get to know all of the family members, and it's like going through all of their experiences. And it also has like two of the actors that were the leads in Tampopo. They're also in this movie, and they all do a really good job. The movie is really kind of like I think what Juzo Itami is interested in is taking these like things in Japan and like how they are culturally to people, and kind of like going over like what expectation, like what societal expectation is and what you're supposed to do, and kind of dissecting those behaviors of like, why do we do this? Like, why do we pay somebody a bunch of money to just like pray for hours over this body? Like, why do we cremate a body, like pay a bunch of money for somebody to cremate a body, and then have all of these family members gather who don't even really know each other, and they're all just like there to pay their respects to this guy who they may or may not have really known or spent any time with. And so he's doing that type of ritualistic thing here that he did in Tampopo with food. So it was like how food brings people together and all of the kind of like cultural aspects in Japan with food. And then this one is with like funerals and the rituals that go along with that. And I really, really enjoyed it. One of my favorite shots in the movie is he puts the camera is down like you're the dead body. And so it's like all the family members gather over the grandpa, and they're all kind of like saying their thoughts and being like, are you sure that he didn't breathe? Because it's like right after he dies and they identify the body and stuff, and they're like, are you sure that he didn't breathe? And they like kind of touch him and they're like, he's so, he's still warm. And it's just like stuff like that, but it's the perspective like kind of feels like you are the dead body and that they're like talking to you, which is really weird, and also really interesting. And all of the camera angles that he decides to do with that are really interesting. And I liked it a lot. I thought that it was really good. Obviously not as good as Tampopo, because it's not really subject matter that I want to really think about that much. But I did find myself kind of like thinking about funerals here in America and kind of like how they're different from the way they are in Japan and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think the movie is really good. It has those dashes of like quirky characters with lots of comedy in it too. There's just a very horny lady that shows up, and it like turns out that she's having an affair with the dad, and he's not telling anyone about it, obviously. And she keeps trying to get him to go into the woods to have sex with her, and it is like very funny. It's like in the middle of the funeral, and she's like, hey, come over here, I gotta show you something in the woods, because she's just like trying to be dirty nasty. Like there's like literally a dead body just sitting in their living room, and she's like, hey, we gotta go over here, I gotta tell you something. And he's just like, no, quit it. So yeah, it's really good. I would like to watch some of his other movies. He's made a ton of movies, and Criterion has a lot of them. Unfortunately, because like you have to have a Criterion subscription to watch these things, and I don't want to pay for that, but I will figure out a way to try and watch the rest.
Where'd you watch this one?
On Criterion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, super good. Highly recommend, especially if you like Tampopo. I think it's a really good. I think Tampopo is like number one, top tier. And then this first one is like a nice way to kind of see how he approaches things and how he approaches subject matter. There's another movie that he made. I think it's called like The Saleswoman or something like that, and it's about like taxes and tax corruption and like fraud and stuff. So I have no idea like how the other subject matters are handled, but I like his style. I like what he does, and I really like characters in his movies. Like they're very fun to watch, even if they're like super weird. So yeah.
Nice. So check it out on Criterion, unless you're Jessica and you're finding another way.
Do you know if Criterion put out like DVDs or Blu-rays of these? Obviously, Tampopo they did, but
Tampopo they do. I have no idea if The Funeral has a Criterion or not. That is a good question. Somebody Google it.
There you go. Unless you're listening to in your car right now, and please don't Google it at the moment. Just do it later.
Don't do it.
Cool. All right. Well, Jessica, we're gonna make this about the boys for the rest of this part.
Yeah, boys only.
We're going into the danger zone.
On a highway.
Well.
Yeah. We're gonna be talking about Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick. All right, so Top Gun, it's an 80s staple, directed by, funny enough, and this will tip my hand on how I feel about the movie, but I love Tony Scott. Tony Scott's one of my favorite directors, one of his weakest movies. Not his fault, but one of his weakest movies. But
he does direct the hell out of this movie.
He tries his best. He's doing as much as he can.
So many like
it's not his
sunsets and yeah,
and it's cool because again we'll get into this. The new one tries to like pay homage to that, and I'm like, if we get a bunch of filmmakers who are inspired by Tony Scott, that'll overjoy me. Anyway, so Top Gun, directed by Tony Scott, it stars Tom Cruise. The gist of it is his character is Pete Maverick Mitchell. And he and his friend Nick Goose Bradshaw are accepted into this elite training school for fighter pilots called Top Gun, and they're trying to compete for the top award, going through this training regiment. But then I'm just going to spoil it because this came out in 86 and most people know what happens in Top Gun. But there's an accident in the air and Goose dies. So then Maverick is very sad. But then he, redeems himself at the end and has this whole where he shoots down these planes and saves Iceman, played by Val Kilmer. It's a whole thing. But really, this movie, it very much wants to be a movie riding on vibes. But as Michael, we were talking about before we hit record, it's a super boring movie for something that people really love. Like I'm not disparaging you if you love this movie, but it's just strange how boring and slow this movie is.
Yeah, it is really boring and strange, but I think that like it's boring in a way that wouldn't have been boring if like a few things had just been different. Like it is weirdly like a character piece, which is not something that you would have thought about with like it's about fighter pilots training and like doing like dick measuring contests, like almost literally doing dick measuring contests, the whole movie. But like a lot of it is really about like Tom Cruise just being bros with his dude, Goose, like, and it is about like that sort of like male friendship and the ways that they like try to buck the system because they are unconventional, but they get results and that sort of thing. But I don't know about you, but I just found the characters like insufferable and uninteresting. And that made it very boring for me.
Yeah. It just, I was talking about this with my brother who I watched it with, but like the the plane scenes are very like are disjointed. Like I don't really, they're discombobulated. Like I really don't know who we're fighting and what's going on.
It looks like, you know what it looks like? It looks like when you're on a Zoom call and you have it on speaker mode where you only see the person who's speaking, and so it's always like constantly shifting to who's speaking, and half of the time they have oxygen masks on, and so you just hear like a voice and you're supposed to know who the voice is.
Yeah, it's a strange, in like it's like the polar opposite of what we get with Top Gun Maverick, which we'll talk about in a second. But that one is like completely built on these plane sequences being like incredibly entertaining and engaging and just fun to watch.
I did like the plane sequences better in Maverick, but I will stand up for the plane sequences in the original Top Gun, because the rest of the movie, I'm just sitting there like either bored or like really strongly wanting to punch Tom Cruise in the face. Like Tom Cruise is one of the most punchable people of all time in this movie, and you have to spend so much time with him that it is a relief when they get into those planes and there's just loud noises and lots of editing, and you see like planes flipping through the air. Like I thought that part was actually pretty cool, and the rest of the movie was not.
Man,
that cool.
I'm wondering how this second one's gonna be, since y'all are poo-pooing on the first one so much.
I think so. I don't know. The thing about the first one is that there's elements of it that are really cool, but like the overall package is not like we mentioned, like Tony Scott, like the direction and cinematography is like very impressive, I thought. And the plane sequences are fairly fun, but there's just so much of this movie that's like, I'm Tom Cruise being annoying in a bar, or I'm Tom Cruise just like high-fiving my pals in class when I like
they
am
have
cutting
such
up.
good high fives in this movie.
Dude.
It's a lot of like
Well, and like if you read like scholarship or like look at a bunch of Letterboxd reviews or whatever on this movie, like there is a lot to be said about like the homoeroticism of this movie that I don't think
so good. It's in there because people were complaining that, you know, like more, not necessarily right wing, but just people were there's some people kind of going, oh, this isn't a homoerotic, or that subtext isn't there. And then somebody dug up this interview with Tony Scott from 1986, and he was like, oh yeah, I mean, we had a whole scene where they're playing volleyball shirtless and we oiled them up. Like he's like,
Yeah.
It's super homoerotic.
Well, and there's like, I remember like having heard that before. I had seen this as a kid, like on TV, and didn't have strong memories of it. So I was basically watching it for the first time, but I had memories of like people being like, haha, gay, Top Gun or whatever. And I was like, okay, sure, this is just gonna be like every other movie where there's like male friendship or whatever. But no, like it is in it. Like they walk into like their first Top Gun class or something, and someone is describing a jet plane, and this one guy goes something like, I'm getting a hard on, and the other guy goes, quit teasing me. Like it's stuff like that where it's just so out there. And then you have Tom Cruise's character who is like so very clearly in love with Goose, and maybe also Iceman, unclear, but Iceman definitely loves Tom Cruise. But there's also this like token female character in the movie, and she spends all this time trying to, like, Tom Cruise kind of tries to seduce her and she rebuffs him, but then she realizes like, oh, I want to actually have sex with this guy. And so there's like this long, like 5 or 6 minute sequence in which she's like trying to seduce him. And then right before they have sex, he goes, I actually need to go take a shower. And then he just like hops on his motorcycle and rides off before completing anything. And like, he spends way more time with Goose with his clothes off than he does with the lady. And like more actually like openly gay, like bro meathead action movies. Like I like the idea of that. In practice, though, I don't know. I just found that I just hated these characters so much. They just seemed like the worst people. It's like a real bad case of like 80s masculine star kind of thing.
I don't think it's I don't think it's the worst. I don't know. I've seen worse representations. It is very like it's very like dudes being dudes to the max.
Well, being obnoxious, like I don't know, like.
I don't know. I guess maybe I'm more callous to that. I'm used to seeing that
Probably.
for most of my life. So I was just like, whatever. They're not harming anybody. they're not, they're not harming anybody. They're just being dummies. Like it's fine.
Not in the movie. I guess like there's so much baggage though with a depiction like that, where like I have seen behavior like this in real life too, and I also know the people I've seen exhibiting this behavior are just the worst people. You know, like it's not just like dudes high-fiving and playing volleyball or whatever, but it's like dudes who are constantly cutting up, dudes who are like constantly like trying to like prove their superiority and domination over things, and like that can be really bonding like if you fit into that, but if you don't fit into that, it can be just really aggressive and hostile. And in the movie it's not that. And so this is not like, this is definitely baggage I'm bringing into the movie, but like I could not just stop thinking about like what would this Tom Cruise character have been like in high school. I would have hated him.
Mally's like, don't bully me. Don't bully me, Tom Cruise.
Yeah, there was like a reflexive like defensiveness. I was like, if this dude knew me, he wouldn't like me and I wouldn't like him.
Yeah. I mean, it's a super boring movie, so I'm not going to defend it extensively. I'm just kind of like, it's like
is.
whatever. Honestly, I wouldn't even recommend watching it to watch Top Gun Maverick.
You barely need to. Like, you just got to know that Goose died.
It shows, yeah, you need to know Goose died, and it shows that whole sequence to a degree in the movie. So you can go, oh, okay, whatever.
Goose died and that he had a mustache. That's also important.
I'm Googling who is Goose.
It's Anthony Edwards. Anyway, so Top Gun Maverick, it's the latest. It just came out this past weekend. It's directed by Joseph Kosinski, who did Tron Legacy, Only the Brave, Oblivion with Tom Cruise. But this takes place about 30 years or so after the events of Top Gun. Yeah, it's not important.
The timeline is hazy because it's ostensibly in 2022 or 21 or something.
No, and remember, this was supposed to come out like 2 or 3 years ago, and they've been holding it. So, yeah, so it really doesn't make sense.
The ages of the characters still don't make sense.
Is working as like a test pilot, but of course is pushing the limits, and so he gets in trouble for one final time. And when he gets in trouble, they're like, "We're sending you back to Top Gun to train this group of fighter pilots because they're going to go on this ostensibly suicide mission, and they got to have the best person to teach them or whatever." I like in this one though that they very much like lay out this is what, like, these are the pilots, this is what they need to do, this is how how it's going to be accomplished. Let's train on that for like an hour and a half, and then let's do a 30-minute.
It's basically the climax of the first Star Wars movie, like the trench run. Like, it's like basically that, except with like real military equipment.
But like, I'm also like on action, especially like action movies to this degree. I like it when they just lay out, like, they don't try to like make the like climax fight like ambiguous. They just kind of go, this is what we're doing, this is the plan, this is what needs to happen, and then we watch them train until we have to wait till they execute it, because of course they're going to execute it, but like, anyway. So this one it picks up with Goose's son, played by Miles Teller. You have John Hamm playing the kind of head admiral at Top Gun. You got a number of people who are playing the other pilots. Ed Harris is there, but the other pilots are Glenn Powell, Jay Ellis, Louis Pullman, Monica Barbero, and then you have Val Kilmer has a brief scene, which we can talk about a little bit in a minute, and then Jennifer Connelly plays his love interest. And I don't know if you picked up on this, but there's a reference in the first movie to him sleeping with like an admiral's daughter or whatever, and so they just like use her character as the person.
Oh, is that what I was spending the whole movie trying to think, like, is this character supposed to be someone that we saw in the first movie? And I couldn't come up with who she was supposed to be.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
That makes sense.
It was. I only picked up on that because I had watched Top Gun the night before. So
I had watched Top Gun 2 days before and had already forgotten all that. So that is a testament to how forgettable the characters are.
It's a deeply forgettable thing.
But you know how you know that that's Goose's son? It's because he has the same mustache.
He has the exact same mustache, and he sings Great Balls of Fire on the piano.
Oh my god. Who wants to have the same facial hair as their father?
He's got like daddy issues, though, because his dad died when he was very young, so...
I guess that's true.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I was overall way more positive on this than the first one. It's incredible. It's so much fun. Again, like with the structure, but they mix the training and like the kind of bantery stuff pretty well, and then the final 30-40 minutes where they're executing the actual plan is fantastic.
Incredible, like
It's
incredible,
so fun.
like finale to this movie.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's summer movie to the max. It's one of those, like, you have people who are like, you got to see it on the biggest screen. If I could see this, I saw it on a regular movie screen, but like if I could see this like on IMAX or something, it would be insane. It would be absolutely incredible.
Man, the sound design too, like you just have those roaring engines and everything, and it is real movie magic. Because like I said, like I'm not like we've established, we're not like completely bought into like Top Gun as a property, and I went to this only because I had some friends who wanted to see it. But by the end, like, and I have my gripes with this movie, but by the end, like, it ends on that like 30-minute sequence of them just like zooming around this canyon, like pew pewing and like gunning the engines, doing flips and stuff, like, and the whole time in the theater, like you're just like shaking from the sounds of the roaring engines. It's great. It's really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I decided we need to what we need to do is take out Chris Pratt from all those big movies that he's in and replace him with Glenn Powell. Glenn Powell is so fucking charming. I want to marry him. He's amazing. That's all I have.
Well, what's funny is like his role is very similar to the guys in the first movie, where he's like this kind of like dickish, like upstart whose whole goal is to be like proving that he's better than everybody else. And this is kind of like, compared to the other characters, that's unique in this movie. In the other movie, everyone's like that. In this movie, he's the only one who's like that, really.
But he's so
somehow
charming
he's
as
not he's not obnoxious in this
so
one, even though I found the other ones very obnoxious in the first one. But he is very charming here.
Well, he's just so, and it's the same, and I say this because he also is the same way in Everybody Wants Some, the Richard Linklater movie. He just like, he has this natural charm and charisma. He's also good if you've ever seen the rom-com on Netflix called Set It Up. He's super charming in that as well. But like, he just kind of has he just has like this effortless charm. Like they were talking about like Tom Cruise just is, movie star persona to the max. And I agree with that. But like, I'm also like watching Glenn Powell and I'm like, even more than like Miles Teller, this dude is like a fucking movie star. He's beautiful. He's super charming, and he handles like the action stuff, incredibly well. I'm just like,
Miles Teller just broods the whole time. That's like what he's given.
And like you were talking about Tom Cruise having a punchable face. Miles Teller has an incredibly punchable face. He's a great actor, but also just has like, you just kind of want to punch him the entire time.
Yeah. I do think, as a result of me not being bought into the characters in the first movie, there are long stretches of this new movie that just focus on the drama between Miles Teller, Goose's son, and Tom Cruise, and like the daddy issues that went in there, and how Tom Cruise in the intervening decades has like treated him. And like, I found that stuff completely unengaging. Like, I did not. I've seen some people talk about like, wow, the emotional core was so strong in this movie, and it wasn't there for me. Like, it felt very perfunctory. It felt a lot like the later Rocky movies, where they've like, Stallone is too old to be convincing as like as an actual heavyweight champion or whatever, but they got to give him like some gravitas, so he's like training someone younger. And like, unlike something like Creed, where you've got a really super charismatic, fun younger like protege, you've got Miles Teller, who's good, but he's given just this mopey role to play that I was not into.
Yeah, he that's why I say Glenn Powell is the star here. I don't know. I was watching him and just kind of going like, he needs to be in like he has way more charisma and is way more engaging on screen than, quite honestly, any of like the Marvel male leads that they use. I'm like, this guy is fantastic. Not that I want him to get sucked into that machine, but I'm just like, this dude has like movie star abilities. Like, we need to be utilizing that more.
It's kind of a shame. I mean, and like, a big part of this movie is it being a metaphor for filmmaking. Like, that's kind of like not so heavy-handed, or pretty heavy-handedly, like kind of like the subtext here is that like, the craft of flying an airplane is a dying art that is being like replaced by drones in the same way that like whatever the craft of making a good summer movie is being replaced by the Marvel movies, or and like to that point, like Glenn Powell in another era would probably have been more than just kind of like a character actor, which is what he is now. But this is not an era in which we have movie stars unless they're going to get roped up into like the MCU or a really iconic TV series or something. You can't just like be in like standalone movies and become a movie star, I don't think, anymore. Or if you do, you're really lucky.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a good point. You mentioned like the kind of how this movie is set up. I was describing it this weekend to a couple people as like it's kind of Tom Cruise's, at least to me, it kind of feels like Tom Cruise's True Grit. This movie star, this very, very iconic movie star kind of reflecting on aging, because there's a really good piece, I forgot who wrote it, but there's a really good piece talking a little bit about his recent career string, like we mentioned the Mission Impossible movies, but like you have those for the most part, and it's kind of like a lot of it is this, upper 50s year old man like trying to defy death constantly because the stuff he's doing in those movies is just insane. And like this one, it's not that he's not trying to defy death, but at the same time there is, I feel like this sense of like, oh, I'm getting older compared to these people, that I haven't seen that type of reflection from like a Tom Cruise movie, which are not necessarily always reflective in a minute. So that makes me excited that, for the next two Mission Impossible movies, if it's going to kind of channel that energy. But in terms of like a movie star recognizing the twilight of his career and his age, I thought it was pretty effective in that sense.
I guess I have no connection to any of these characters, and my connection to Tom Cruise is as someone who genuinely seems interested in like the craft of the action blockbuster, which is something that I don't think a lot of people seem to be that interested in. And as in terms of his like whole career, like I don't think any of this is as interesting as like what he was doing in the 90s, but like in terms of like Tom Cruise as almost like an auteur of someone who is like perfecting like what is possible with the summer blockbuster when it has good bones, as opposed to being like intellectual property, I think is like, this is a really interesting part of that project, because before I saw this movie, I wouldn't have thought to lump it in with Mission Impossible. And I remember seeing the trailer for the new Mission Impossible movie before this movie and thinking, man, I wish I was seeing the new Mission Impossible movie. But having seen this now, it like definitely feels of the same project of like understanding the like core like visceral texture of like a summer blockbuster. And like there's tons of CGI in this movie, and I only know this because there's a ton of like digital artists like credited in the credits. But it has the feel of something like the original Top Gun, or a lot of those like 80s movies, and a lot of those like Mission Impossible movies, where it is really grounded in like a physical like tactility that a lot of like, modern effects driven blockbusters don't have. And not just tactility, but like the way that the action scenes are shot has a real solid grounding to it as well, as opposed to just, we're going to put fantastic imagery in front of you. And who cares how it's edited or framed or whatever. The movies the action blockbusters that he's chosen to invest, like the twilight of his career, probably the last few years that he's actually going to physically be able to be in movies like this, they have all been like real pieces of craft on the action movie level, that is really unique and out of time, like honestly. Like, and it makes sense that he would be drawn to a nostalgia project like Top Gun for that reason, because the craft of what this movie is doing does feel like out of place compared to, your other action blockbusters that you might see.
Yeah. And, again, even though this movie's not perfect and it's not, this groundbreaking piece of blockbuster movies making, I do agree. Like, it is such a I appreciate that Tom Cruise is really overly invested in creating this product, and the way, you can kind of laugh at him because he does go overboard to a degree. But like, I don't think that anybody making not only just Marvel movies, but like any kind of blockbuster movie, whether it's DC or any of these, like, even like look at the recent like Harry Potter spinoff movie. Like, I don't think anybody else is putting that much effort and attention in creating something that is visually stunning and entertaining to the audience when it comes to blockbusters like this. And so, I don't know. I hope we can find more outlets for things like this, but I'm just, I appreciate that he at least does have that attention to it.
Yeah, and one last note, like, speaking of the audience, like, I saw this with a pretty packed theater, and this is doing really well at the box office. And I think that is a movie that has, for whatever reason, like, invited really responsive crowds. Like, the crowd I was with was a bunch of like middle-aged people, probably who had seen Top Gun, in the 80s or whatever. And they were like hooting and hollering and clapping like the whole time. And some of it I was like, why are you guys clapping at this? But other times I was like with them. I was like, yeah, man, this rocks. Like, it was like a real fun movie-going experience. And given like how I guess like sparsely attended so many of the movies I go to are, because theatrical distribution is dying, it was really fun to be in that. It felt like a summer movie, and like, to me it felt nostalgic because I remember experiences when I was younger going to packed movie theaters and seeing dumb action movies and having fun with lots of people in the crowd. I don't know, like, it, like, on that level did kind of trigger some sense of the past for me, I guess, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and so like I say, I mean, is it perfect? No, but I think I appreciate that we have movies like this still being made, and that people like actually. Again, Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise, but I appreciate that he's putting an attention to the craft that we don't always see from a lot of people. So I'm like, we can fault him for a lot of things, but I do appreciate that he's at least like, let's make good blockbuster movies, because
someone's got to do it.
Yeah, because hell, you see some of these things that are coming out, and I'm like, ugh. So, Top Gun Maverick, it's in theaters now. Again, like, I don't think you as we expressed, with the first one, you don't have to be a giant fan of the first Top Gun to go see this. I think if you go in completely cold, and I think you'll be fine. I think it's just, I can't stress enough how much fun that final sequence is. It's just so charged and energized.
It's incredible.
It's like hell yeah. So, all right, we're gonna take a quick break, and then we will be back talking about the Cat and the Canary after this. And we're back with part 2 of episode 406 of Cinematary. And in this part, we're going to be kicking off our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1927's The Cat and the Canary. Directed by Paul Lenny from a script by Robert Hill, Al Cohen, and Edward J. Montaigne. The film is based off of a play of the same name by John Willard, and the film stars Laura LaPlante, Creighton Hale, Forrest Stanley, and Tully Marshall. So if you were confused or thinking this wasn't a 1920s movie, those names should affirm that for you. The relatives of Cyrus West gather at his estate on the 20th anniversary of his death to hear the reading of his will. Annabelle West is named the heir to Cyrus's fortune under the condition that she is declared sane by a doctor. Later in the evening, the family is informed that a dangerously insane man, known as the Cat, is on the loose in the area. When Cyrus's lawyer is found dead, Annabelle fears she is the next target. The Cat and the Canary was the first of 3 American films directed by German-born Paul Lenny, who was also a painter and art director. The Cat and the Canary is the product of early 20th century German Expressionism. According to art historian Joan Weinstein, Expressionism includes the art styles of Die Brücke and Der Blue Reiter, Cubism, Futurism, and Abstraction. The key element that connects these styles is the concern for the expression of inner feelings over verisimilitude to nature. Film historian Richard Peterson notes that German cinema became famous for stories of psychological horror and for uncanny moods generated through lighting, set design, and camera angles. Paul Lenny is a product of that. He made the film from 1925 Waxworks, about a wax figure display at a fair. And that film impressed Carl Laemmle, the German-born president of Universal Pictures. Side note, seen Waxworks. It's not that impressive. Laemmle was struck by Lenny's departure from Expressionism by the inclusion of humor and playfulness during grotesque scenes. Laemmle turned to John Willard's popular play, The Cat and the Canary, which centered on an heiress whose family tries to drive her insane to steal her inheritance. Willard hesitated in permitting Laemmle to film his play because, as historian Douglas Broad explains, quote, that would have exposed to virtually everyone the trick ending, destroying the play's potential as an ongoing moneymaker. As Universal anticipated, director Paul Lenny turned Willard's play into an expressionist film suited to an American audience. Historian Bernard F. Dick observes that, quote, Lenny reduced German expressionism with its weird chiaroscuro, asymmetric sets, and excessive stylization to a format compatible with American film practice. Jen DeLugos argues that, quote, many stage play movie adaptations in the 1920s fall into the trap of looking like a stage play taped for the big screen, with minimal emphasis on the environment and plenty of stage play overacting. This, however, was not the case for Lenny's film. Richard Scheib notes that, quote, Lenny's style is something that lifts The Cat and the Canary up and away from being merely a film stage play and gives it an amazing visual dynamism. While the film contains elements of horror, according to film historian Dennis L. White, it is, quote, structured with an end other than horror in mind. Some scenes may achieve horror and some characters dramatically experience horror, but for these films, conventional clues and a logical explanation, at least an explanation plausible in hindsight, are usually crucial and are of necessity their maker's first concern. In 1927, Variety said, what distinguishes Universal's film version of the play is Paul Lenny's intelligent handling of a weird theme, introducing some of his novel settings and ideas with which he became identified. The film runs a bit over long, otherwise it's more than an average satisfying feature. The New York Times in 1927 said, this is a film which ought to be exhibited before many other directors to show them how a story should be told. For in all that he does, Mr. Lenny does not seem to strain at a point. He does it as naturally as a man twisting the ends of his mustache in thought. Which is a great line. On that note, let's talk a little bit about The Cat and the Canary. Had anybody seen this before?
No.
All right. Well, Jessica, what'd you make of The Cat and the Canary? Oh, we should also preface that there are, I guess, 2 versions available. So there's a 90-minute version.
It's like 84, 83 minutes.
Yeah, available on Amazon Prime. And then I watched the hour and 20-minute version on YouTube.
Oh, wait. The one on Amazon Prime is an hour and like 10 minutes or something. I think that one is like very clearly missing parts because I watched it first and I was a little bit confused and I had to go and watch the other one.
Okay. Yeah, so there's 2 versions. I watched the YouTube one. Jessica, you watched the Amazon Prime version?
Yeah, I was going to say, whoops. I watched the shorter one. But yeah,
What did you think, having watched the shorter one?
I thought that it was pretty entertaining. It kind of lost me in the middle part where, like, I thought the beginning was pretty solid. And also the Amazon Prime one, like, there was, like, the soundtrack, like, the music that they put with it, and part of it didn't match at all. It was like a da 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 dee 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 like type of like soundtrack, and I was like, what the? And I wasn't even really paying attention to it. And Cam was like, this music is awful. He was like, this doesn't go with this at all. And I was like I was paying so close attention to the visuals that I didn't even really register that the song was like on loop over and over and over again, and it was just like da 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 da, and it was like during
people are dying da da da.
Yeah, it was like the part. It was the part where she had gotten it was before she got the necklace taken off of her, and then once it was just when the family members were just kind of farting around and like hiding and like going under beds and I guess doing wacky stuff, but it still didn't like go with it. And then right when the necklace scene came, which I thought was like the strongest visually out of the like all of the stuff in the movie, but it was like right when that was starting, then it started in on the like looming kind of music, and I was like, oh thank God, because it was like just like a weird loop of that weird sound that was going. But yeah, I mean obviously
just to bash the Amazon Prime version one more time. The visuals, like whatever whatever version they have of the film is in rough shape compared to the YouTube one, which is fairly crisp.
There's a part where it kind of lags and it looks like an image that's trying to load, and it just like their faces like stretch out, and I thought it made the movie look cooler because I was like, oh okay, that's pretty weird. But, you know, obviously it's an old movie, so it's, you know, there were parts in the middle where I was just, like, a little bit bored, because I was just like, okay, I can kind of see where this is going. But I was so confused about the envelope thing, because I like, the guy with the second envelope died. Like, and then I was like, what the heck what was the purpose of the second envelope? Like, I know that the second envelope showed who it was, like, if that girl is proven to be insane, that the person in the second envelope, like, inherited everything instead. And I was just like, why did the Cyrus West guy do that? Why was he like, here's a backup envelope in case like the first person goes crazy? Like, this is,
Wait, isn't the thing that like the guy had been driven mad by his family and was really irritated with his family, and so
yeah, but that doesn't,
he was gonna like
it still doesn't make any sense. Like if the older people in his family, because it's 20 years later, which also doesn't, I also don't understand why it's 20 years after he died, because like that part really threw me.
No, it's very very
because I was just like, if it's 20 years after this old ass guy died, then all of the people there are like in their 30s and 40s, so they were like in their 20s, and then some of them might have been in their teens or like were children or something. And so I was like, what did they do to this guy? Like,
I hope that there was just a bunch of kids like badgering him, and that's what made him insane.
And I was just like, why did he do it 20 years later? And then he was like, his old ass was like, I'm gonna do 20 years later, and then I want you guys to meet at my old creepy mansion in 20 years at midnight. He was like, drive your asses over here and come over here. And then the maid lady is like, I've just been creeping around here for 20 years alone. And oh my gosh,
Mammy Pleasant is a chore.
Are we supposed to use the word mammy? Like, I don't know. When I saw that in the credits, I was so worried. I saw it in the credits and I said, please no. I was like, please don't.
She was my favorite immediately because when you first meet her, once the 20 years passes or whatever, she's just like, I just spend my time with the ghosts. And you're like, oh, okay, that's nice. And like the lawyer just keeps going like, oh, okay. She's like, I spend it with the ghosts and the people still here. And like looks around and we're like, oh, okay.
It's a great it's goofy and I wonder if the play like makes more sense. And it was drawing off of like knowledge of a popular play, but like it does have like when everyone shows up at the haunted house, it's got a great like you just check all the classic boxes for like haunted house thing. You know, you've got like the old caretaker of the grounds. You've got like people riding up and be like, "What are you coming here for?" And they're like, "Oh, it's a family thing." It's like, but what about the ghosts? And like I don't know. It is very like archetypal in terms of like haunted house movie stuff. I don't know if it felt that way in 1927, but it was like enjoyably camp. It was almost like watching Clue or something like that, where there's like a kind of, it feels like there's a knowingness to how it's deploying like those typical tropes.
Yeah, I agree. It's, it's very silly. It's hard to argue that, but I think because like Clue's a perfect example. Like it is, so you have these archetypes in place and you just kind of have this, I think I agree with the reviews from the time, like the added like German expressionist aesthetic really does elevate it, because I feel like if it was just like a very standard like Carl Lammel directing or somebody like that directing, one of the Hammer film people directing this, it would be very like straight by the books, pretty boring, and really not have any of that atmosphere. And that does help it, is that it has kind of that atmosphere. And that was one I don't totally, like I said, I don't really, Waxworks is very visually engaging because Paul Lenny is like I said, it was a painter and an art designer, but a kind of boring movie. And so I'm glad that this one's a little bit more entertaining and he gets to utilize like some of those expressionist techniques. It also like has those great moments where people are like shouting, or rather than just having the straight text all the time, it like implements these, it like kind of finds the mood of the character and like uses that, some like there's one,
I love the title cards.
Yeah, there's one where like the characters are kind of like concerned and they like flow, it like flows up in like this kind of wavy fashion. And then there's one where Annabelle is like yelling, it has like this kind of shout, and it seems like it's almost even breaking out of the title card. Those are like,
is that the one where there's one where like I think a person's meant to have yelled like profanity or whatever, and they just have like the comic book like asterisk like star kind of thing like that just like pop on the different parts of the screen?
Yeah, and it always feels like very visually engaging, just for being, because I mean, one thing, Jessica, we were talking about this morning is like, I think it's tough for a lot of people to get engaged with like the acting style in not only this movie but just silent movies in general, because I mean, if you look at it from their point of view, they have to kind of overact because you don't really have any sound, so it's not like you can kind of convey the lines. You have to overact to a degree to really like visualize how you're feeling, and that having that along with the aesthetic that's very German expressionist makes it much more effective than just being a straight melodrama, because it has to really like engage your interest through the visuals, not only of like what you're seeing in terms of the house, but also just how the actors are reacting to what's going on around them.
I also think that like people were used to seeing like plays and stuff, and this is adapted from a play, and theater acting is very much like a full body thing where you have to be like extremely expressive because like you have to reach like the entire audience. and I think that they're kind of like coming off of that into film, and so I think that there are still like parts of it left in there too.
Yeah, I think it is interesting, like how people are conditioned to understand what is like believable and realistic human behavior, because I mean, modern acting maybe has more like verisimilitude than, you know, silent film acting, but it is not how people actually act in real life. You know, there's still like like tropes and things that people draw upon. I think like at the time, you had like a lot of not just like theater, but like vaudeville-y sort of stuff that like really relied on pantomime and that sort of thing. I think there's like a lot of cultural things at the time that make the acting in silent film not seem so anomalous, like compared to like if you've only seen like movies like from the past few decades and are looking back. And I think that that's like an interesting thing that like culturally there's like a network of references of how you see human beings depicted, and based on that like frame of references you can kind of like find the line of best fit to where how this is how you expect to see human beings depicted, and that's like quote unquote like believable or realistic or engaging. And so I don't know, I think it's like it's almost like a lost like art form in a way, like the kind of acting that silent film actors do, because most people aren't even like attempting what they're attempting now, and they have like a different idiom almost.
Well, I was thinking about this after we were talking this morning, Jessica, and I think a good example is a movie that we talked about last week, Smiley Face, which we talked a little bit about like how a lot of that movie is sold because, you know, normally like with a stoner movie, in order to convey to the audience that like the character is high, usually the director will implement some, you know, kind of like a haziness, or will have like stuff appear that's not there, things like that, to kind of go, oh, they're in a state, you know, they're in a drug state at the moment. In this one, because they don't really do any of that, or even Smiley Face, they don't do any of that. It's just Anna Faris having to like convey how stoned and how out of it she is, like through her face and what she's expressing. And like it's almost a silent movie performance when I was thinking about it, because I'm like, a lot of that movie is just her having to overreact to stuff because she has to convey to the audience how high she is, but also still like sell the whole thing to you. And I think, you know, I don't think it necessarily like sits with a lot of people because it is so overacting. I think to a large degree, the new Hollywood system, the like new Hollywood movement really killed this type of acting, because everything had to be naturalistic, and then you had like method acting and things like that, and everybody feels like performances have to be very naturally like realized. But I think there's something like dreamlike and surreal about the like silent movie performances like this, where they have to they're not acting like real people, but it's also, you know, most of this movie feels like a dream sequence anyway, so like that lines up with the logic. I don't know if that clears up anything.
I think that makes sense. There's like I think in silent film in general, not just like just the acting, but like a lot of things about silent film feels really phantasmagoric and stuff. And I think I don't know, like something about the absence of synchronized sound makes it just really, really dreamy. And I think also like liberated the filmmakers to do stuff that is not as rigorously tied to like temporality as we're used to it. You know, whether that's like the stuff that like George Méliès was doing with like the special effects or stuff like that, or whether that's just the way that like there's like silent films are filmed at a different frame rate, and that has presented problems or inconsistencies in like how fast the silent films are played back than like what we're used to. And so there's, I don't know, like I think the acting plays into that, even with the movie that's like fairly goofy like this one, where you get this feeling of you're kind of like floating through it rather than being led like point A to point B in a temporal manner like you would in like a typical movie. And the title cards contribute to that too, because the title cards, not just in this movie, but in any silent film, you are like interrupting the action, like with a cut that takes place out of time to tell you, here's what the character just said. which I think is very strange and kind of out of body in effect.
Any thoughts, Jessica? Kind of, I mean, I don't feel like I'm gonna like sway your mind, but like I think that at least that's kind of how I rationalize watching silent movie performances.
Yeah, I think all that stuff makes sense, and I definitely agree with it, especially adding to like the dreamlike thing. But it is kind of jarring when you're not used to watching those types of things all the time. Like I don't really watch a lot of black and white movies. I almost always only watch it for this series that we do specifically. And every time I watch one, like a silent movie that's black and white, also I'm just like when they start in on it, I like forget. And like whenever the Professor E type of dude came in and he was like wide mouthed and wide eyed and was like doing like this with his hands up all the time, I was like, why is this little silly little man like doing this? And I was just like it immediately is like something is not right about this person that's doing this. And it kind of made me appreciate the performance of the maid lady more, because she was like so reserved and like she's supposed to be super creepy, but she doesn't do it in like a I'm gonna like hunch over and hold my arms like this and like be creepy. I'm gonna do it in like a very reserved, like lurking type of thing, which I appreciated, like that sort of performance. But I know that there are different ways to do it, and it definitely adds to the flavor of the movie. Like, you know, the kind of movie that you're watching, and it puts you in that sort of like dreamlike state of mind, like you said. Like, I agree with that, but it is definitely like immediately like kind of funny to me. Like, it automatically makes me kind of chuckle when I see it.
Yeah, no, I think, this is why when I was watching it, I hadn't watched like a silent movie in a minute, and I was like, I need to watch more silent movies, because you do have to like kind of get in that headspace. I think there's people who will go, young people should be watching these types of things, whether it's, something like this or like even like a Chaplin movie or things like that. And I'm like, yes, but also I think it's a little bit easier with like a Chaplin or a Buster Keaton movie, because there's that action and it's more about their facial expressions. That the facial expressions are kind of the lines. There's less like, dialogue. But I think regardless of what it is, silent movies in general, you do have to, it's almost like a muscle that you have to train to a degree, because it is difficult to kind of sit with those, not because we don't have patience or anything like that, but it's just, I think it does require a level of understanding what's going on, and we're just so far removed from that type of filmmaking that on a daily basis, whether it's movies or TV or anything, like a lot of stuff doesn't implement the traits that make silent movies effective, and so it's almost like learning a new language to a degree, I would argue.
And I think also you have to have a kind of like generosity with the format, because sometimes the stories that they told were by necessity maybe not the best fit for silent films, but that was what they had. Whereas like something like Chaplin or whatever, like silent comedy is its own sort of form that was like invented for the camera, right? But like something like this, which is like a story like that honestly like is pushing against like the limitations of silent film, because we've already kind of like joked about some of the stuff in the plot doesn't exactly make sense, and like just the overall like kind of murder whodunit sort of thing is something that I think is better suited to like more flexibility with dialogue and exposition than this movie does. And like the sequences that really cook in this movie are the ones that don't need that, right? Where you got like the hands reaching out, toward the lady with her necklace, or you have the scene where the dude's under the bed and, he's like trapped there while and he's like, what am I going to do? Like some of those things are good and like really play into silent film well, but then other stuff where it's like at the end of the movie where they're starting to explain like all the pieces are falling into place. And we've all seen this sort of scene before, like either in an Agatha Christie book or like a more modern, like, mystery film with sound where the exposition at the end of the film happens to explain all the weird stuff. But it's a poor fit for the silent film compared to some of the other things in this movie. And I think that that's another thing, is just recognizing that like these stories, people wanted them to be told in movie format, but by necessity they had to kind of have the stiltedness to them because you had to include elements that maybe wouldn't be optimized for the format that you had available.
Yeah, I was thinking about that while watching. I would love to see so they remade this in the 30s, I think like 1932 or something. They remade it again. I don't know if that one's any better or worse. But I was like, I think that this could play well if you remade this like now. I was thinking, just in terms of like, because it's such an atmosphere movie, and it's supposed to be like the one historian said, it's horror, but it's more like spookiness and creepiness. It's not like straight horror, so it's not like a James Wan or something. But one person I was thinking of yesterday was because because this movie is so like steeped in atmosphere that I think he would be perfect, is Oz Perkins, who did Gretel and Hansel. Like, I feel like if he took this movie like and he just soaked it in that atmosphere, like it would be really effective.
Yeah, I do think that it would be interesting. The 1930s movie, I'm looking that up. It has Bob Hope in it, which is really interesting to me.
That sounds amazing. Is he like doing stand up like in the middle of it at some point?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, to that point also, like it's funny because it's like a who done it movie, but it's more like a he done it, because you don't ever see that guy ever again. Like, you see him at the beginning, and that speaks to, like, you know, like you were saying, O'Malley, like their capability. Like, they couldn't just shoot him with all of the people too if he's playing like the spooky guy who's like grabbing everyone. Like, we don't see him ever again, literally ever. And it's like obviously if the audience is thinking about it and they're trying to figure out who the killer is, you have to have the killer like also be there among the, like, with the other people as well, because otherwise it's like, okay, this person disappeared and like it's pretty obvious that they're one of the people that is just like gone. Because like whenever his mask came off, I was like, oh yeah, it's literally the other dude. It's like,
yeah, I had forgotten about him, to be honest.
I loved his mask though, where he had like the tusks and like the big bulgy eye. I was just like, oh, they're like really going for it.
A one eyeball type of thing. And yeah, they do a lot of, they try to do, like, to the atmosphere point, like they do a lot of like creepy stuff with like certain things, and some of it is, it's funny because some of it is like, I don't know what is like a bad aged transfer, and like what on Amazon just looked bad, but or what was like purposeful. But there's like one part where the lady has almost like whited out eyes, like it's like her eyes are like, has these like kind of shadows on it, and it just looks like so creepy. I was like, I don't know if that was like on purpose or if it just looked old and weird, but that part looked pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if you add a little bit more modern style to this and slap an A24 on it, the people, all the young people would watch it. Seems like it.
And it's still something that is like pretty relevant, of like, oh, this is like a rich person that died and people are fighting over his money. Like Knives Out was a super popular movie, and that is like also the same thing. So
yeah, you have you have this like woman being gaslit into thinking that she's insane. Like that's why I say, like, I think you could easily like adapt this for modern audiences, and you get somebody who can kind of just soak it in atmosphere. And I think you could easily I think I could easily translate, because yeah, it's not very period centric at all. So just throwing it out there, universe, if you'd like to make a Cat and the Canary remake, there you go. Oz Perkins, feel like you're perfect for it. Any lingering thoughts? Any other thoughts on this movie? I think overall I enjoyed it. It is kind of, it's silly, but it's a fun time. I think you mentioned it's a he done it, but also it's a movie that ends with what I'm pretty sure are two cousins hooking up.
I couldn't figure out if they were related. I was like, I couldn't figure it out. Related? No, some of them are. One of them was like a protege or whatever. He worked. I was trying to figure out if they were related. Also,
I thought it was two cousins being like, let's just shack up.
I don't think so. I think
it's the 1920s.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I rolled it off. I was like,
he might have been the protege or whatever, but I don't know. My final thoughts are, dear Lord, they use the cat and the canary metaphor so many times.
Man, I think.
Oh.
My favorite is when they're talking about the guy who's escaped the asylum, and they're like, he thinks he's a cat. And he treats everyone like a canary.
And at that point, you've already heard it 3 times, and it just sends you into hysterics. You're just like, oh shit, this is actually super funny.
It's a great movie title, you need the Leo DiCaprio and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood gif of him pointing at the TV.
Yeah. I think my final thought is there's that bunch of maybe 10 silent films that everyone talks about, so you've got The Gold Rush and Intolerance and all that sort of stuff, and those tend to be the only silent films people have seen if they've seen any. And it's really interesting, I think, to go outside of that canon and to see what were the majority of movies that people were watching. And I think this is maybe a good example of that, which is it's adapted from a play. It was pretty popular, but maybe doesn't have a huge legacy like a Chaplin or a D.W. Griffith would have. But it's still really competently made, and it's kind of interesting. And I've enjoyed that. And I think the last couple of years for the Young Critics movies for the 1920s, we've kind of done these was it Seventh Heaven? Was that the one last year or 2 years ago? And that's another one where it's not one of those big canonical movies, but it's well preserved and is a good indication of a certain type of film that was at that era. And I don't know if you're at all interested in silent film and have already hit the classics, don't stop there.
Yeah, I'm trying to look what we did. If Seventh Heaven was last year or not. Of course, we don't have that one listed in the thing. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It was one, it's always nice because there is this kind of canonical list. I think, well, for next week's, Faust is relatively canonical, but
yeah. Well, that's Murnau too,
yeah,
right?
But we also had Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which I've seen multiple times. It's great, but also it's absolutely
it's legally required that you see that in an intro to film.
There's
class.
literally that whole joke in Portlandia where Fred Armisen's character is have you seen the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari? You're a film fan, and so. Yeah, I agree. I think it's nice to kind of see what else was happening, especially because, coming out of the German Expressionist movement, Murnau and Fritz Lang are kind of the main faces, but Paul Laney was doing a bunch of stuff. He's German-born as well. He was doing a lot of films and then came over to America. He just doesn't have the pedigree of a Murnau or a Fritz Lang. But like I said, Waxworks is not necessarily my favorite, but it is very, because he has that painter background and that art direction background, it's visually, stunning to look at. And so it's cool to kind of see those craftsmen kind of come over and bring that into American films. Yeah. So, and also if you want to learn more about German Expressionism, especially next week's film, maybe check out my video essay on our YouTube channel.
It's good.
Yeah, so, little plug. All right, well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we list all the movies we talked about in this episode. If you would like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Cinematary. We have a $1 and $5 tier for patrons, but thank you so much to our patrons: Cam, Chad Newsom, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Teresa Marsathi, Titus Arthur, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Next week, like I mentioned, we're going to be diving into deep dive into German Expressionism with 1926 Faust, which is a movie. I'll preface for anybody who's kind of wanting to watch along. This is a movie from 1926 that is visually incredible. It looks like way.
It rocks.
It looks way above its time. It's just a visually striking movie. I'm sure if you go and look at stills online, there's these scenes where the devil character has the spread robe thing over it's just it's incredible, just the visuals that they're able to capture in this movie. So if you're debating between the two movies to watch, this one at least visually is crazy, just crazy to watch. So highly recommend it. If you want to look at the other Young Critics Watch All Movies picks, they're on cinematary.com now, so let us know. And thank you to everybody who voted. But until next week, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you then.